Ok, parfait.
It's the semi-finals of Italia 90. We're down to the last 3 shows, 4 if you're including the third place playoff, which I wasn't really gonna, but that'll be an interesting day. Not a skippable podcast, I'm not saying that, but there'll be plenty in that, don't worry, to pad it out. We've got Italy and Argentina here in what is going to be, I think, story-wise for the host nation, the standout game of the tournament. And Turlock, we've alluded to Maradona stirring shit pre-tournament, and it was always going to happen coming into this game. But the Neapolitans, where he plays his club football, all his home fans there, how much they love him. He claims they should be supporting himself instead of Italy. You sort of alluded your doubts about how successful that actually was in terms of gaining Italian support. It might have been minuscule, but in terms of getting in the opponent's head, starting a few mind games, how big do you think that actually was?
Well, it certainly has an impact because the Italian camp has had to come out and kind of counter it. Now, I think we can conclude at this stage that he hasn't forced much of a wedge between Naples and the national team. There's banners around the stadium for this game that read stuff like Maradona, we love you, but Italy is our motherland. But yeah, he keeps trying to stir the pot. He's talking about it, how it's, as he puts it, it's horrible to discover that there's so much racism against Neapolitans in Italy. This is before the semi-final, so he's still banging that drum. But so obviously Schillaci is, as a Sicilian, is the designated man sent out to counter this, and he says, "I have become a bit of a symbol of anti-racist reunification of the country." And that's what he likes most about the World Cup. Very interesting that the word racism is used so openly to refer to, what's really a regional divide, particularly in this day and age when it's hard to get anyone to acknowledge racism as a thing in a lot of circumstances.
You can just imagine Cameroon looking up as they see yet another Black Magic headline going, "Are you fucking serious? Schillaci is your beacon of fighting racism. That's ridiculous." But I didn't quite realise Schillaci was used so much as a counter argument for this, Turlock. I remember it being talked about at the time. I think it was Milan that had a banner about him uniting North and South, which again, it's probably what you want from your World Cup. A player to bring all of the country together. But I didn't quite realise he was used as such a response to Maradona's attempt to rub their noses in it.
Yeah, and I may be doing him a disservice. He may have kind of volunteered these quotes, but it certainly smacks of some kind of prepared rebuttal. But I don't know how necessary it was because, as I said, I think the crowd is breaking pretty 80-20, let's say, at the very most in favor of Italy. Although Argentina had got very good support against the USSR, so as long as in Naples, so as long as the Italians weren't actually involved, the Neapolitans were getting behind their man. One of the kind of, or certainly a very vocal ultra in Naples, Gennaro Montuori, said, "I would have liked it better if this match never took place," which is a bit ominous because Italian ultras can stop games taking place if they really want to. But yeah, that kind of indicates the divided loyalties. The mayor of Naples, Pietro Lezzi, comes out very strongly against Maradona, but I think that issue has pretty much been put to bed ahead of this game. This is going to be a very hostile atmosphere for the Argentinians. Italy are going to get fanatical support, and Maradona, I think, as Dave will possibly tell us, he's not in the best of shape himself. He has an inflamed right foot and a swollen left ankle, and by all accounts can barely walk ahead of this game.
I think just with the amount of people you've quoted there, it nearly shows whether whether the divide worked or not, which it didn't, I suppose we can say. The mind games, every quote is about this coming into this game. So it's very much probably put the pressure all on Italy, the country itself, the fans, all the talk like that pre-match. Is there any kind of modern equivalent? I was trying to think. The only thing I could come up with would be if Klopp went on to manage Germany and they played England, that you could see Liverpool and most of Dublin cheering on Klopp's Germany in that kind of hypothetical situation. But I can't think of any sort of situation where it would even be considered the way this would. As you said, 80-20. I can't see any other situation.
Well, it's funny because we were just discussing in a much earlier episode at this stage that for political reasons, the crowd in Zagreb for a friendly before this tournament had supported the Netherlands rather than Yugoslavia and the Croatian crowd. But yeah, short of a real gigantic political cleavage like that, I can't think of too many scenarios where that would arise these days.
Maybe Roy Keane's Azerbaijan if they come to play Dublin.
In Cork, possibly.
Let's get on to the game then and see how this one turns out, whether Diego has managed to turn the screw and whether the Italian fans are all going to buckle under that pressure.
Yeah, well, we've spoken throughout the tournament maybe about Maradona and kind of we've kind of touched on it there in terms of the Naples connection, the Napoli connection even. He's largely been kind of subdued during the tournament, perhaps not at his best, not at his peak anymore, although it should be noted that he did actually lead Napoli to the title that year, so he was at club level anyway playing a high level of football. But I suppose this is the sort of game that has maybe gone down in infamy for its less for its footballing class, I guess, and more for the ill-tempered off the ball incidents where 8 players were booked, 1 player was sent off. The English journalist Charlie Stewart didn't hold back when he described it as a disgraceful game that sullied the once good name of football. Bear in mind, this moment England were preparing for their own semi-final, so I suppose maybe they were looking ahead to the final and maybe not entirely enthused. As far as the game itself, there were only 17 minutes on the clock when Scalacci opened the score, and the top scorer as it was in the tournament at the time, 5 goals in 6 games. So the architect of the move was very much Giannini. A lovely piece of skill, and then probably one of the worst headers you'll ever see to set up Scalacci to set up Gianluca Vialli, for what was a remarkable shot considering the circumstances. He was beaten out by Goycochea as he was against Ireland. Scalacci was in the right place at the right time to stab it home.
Remarkable even more so, you mentioned Vialli. Remarkable Vialli's on the pitch. We probably forgot to even give him a mention to the fact that somehow he's made his way back in the team for Baggio and Vicini. That was all tricks by probably a really bad time to start reverting to type,
Well, it's very much Vialli was the architect of Scalacci's, I suppose, smash and grab goal in the first game of the tournament, the game against Austria, which really kind of set the Italians on their way. So I'm not hugely surprised he was in, particularly as Carnevale, the Roman striker who had been first choice going into the tournament, had very much not played up to maybe the level that Italy would expect, and Scalacci had very much taken him over. As the game goes on, Italy are reasonably comfortable. It's similar enough to Argentina's quarterfinal against Yugoslavia in the sense that Argentina kind of make most of the run, and I suppose they have to after conceding an early goal. It takes them really until halfway through the second half before they're able to hit back in. It's Claudio Caniggia, another player who's maybe has been a little undersold going into the tournament and provides a couple of match-turning incidents when he does come on, and it's very much his header, a very simple header that loops over the keeper into the net, and it's level. And the rest of the game is quite nip and tuck. I referenced Charlie Stewart earlier. He goes on to say, "We had every dirty trick in the book. Cynical body checking, disgraceful tackles, and out-and-out thuggery by the Argentinians. Although the Italians were no angels either, but certainly more sinned against than sinning." I don't know if there's maybe a little hangover from the 1986 World Cup and the well-known political troubles between the two sides. He certainly doesn't hold back on the Argentinians.
I want a graphic coming up there, sinned against, sins for. You know what I mean? Like a Sky Sports style graphic. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's very what's that Netflix season that's gone up about like English football, old school English football? It's gotten absolutely panned since it's gone up.
The English game, isn't it?
Yeah. Like it's very that kind of language, isn't it?
Mm. It's an emotional game, and I suppose considering we are in Italy and Pope John Paul has already taken a particular interest in the tournament, maybe sinning is appropriate language in this case. But Bobby Charlton, the World Cup winner in 1966, certainly didn't agree whatsoever. His assessment was, this is cracking football, South American football at its best. Well, Liam Brady, who famously played for many years in Italy, was a little more circumspect about the Italians, who more or less said they don't have the temperament to go through with it. I feared they wouldn't. So that's his assessment. As it goes to extra time, Roberto Baggio is on the pitch at this point, giving the Italians an extra attacking impetus. And the attacking impetus on this occasion came from the Argentinian Riccardo Giusti, who was sent off for hitting him late in the first period of extra time. And so it goes to penalties. And I suppose it's probably inevitable Maradona ends up scoring one of the pivotal spot kicks for Argentina. It's that man again, Goycochea. He saves twice from Donadoni and Serena, and the Argentinians go through to the final.
These are a selection of today's Italian newspapers, and they're all crucifying Maradona. Let's have a look at some of the headlines. La Gazzetta dello Sport, the most popular of the Italian newspapers, says Maradona KO'd, Maradona humiliated. Tutto Sport says Maradona ripped apart. And Corriere dello Sport says Maradona risks elimination. And they also say Argentina really humiliated.
Poor El Serena as well. He made such a big impact coming back in. Funny again though, Vicini's had to switch the type. He's had to bring in these players who he's brought on early in the tournament to change a game. He waits till they're struggling and then he brings them on at this point. I find it very funny that he seems to switch back. I imagine he got a large quantity of the blame, particularly for the kind of stuff with Baggio. Baggio also had a great free kick laid on, and Turlock, this probably falls back into more your Goycochea criticism. Having watched some of this back now, you start to turn back the other way, because he does make some very vital saves in this, like that free kick, and again from the penalties.
Oh no, I think he's excellent in this game, and he's very good in the Yugoslavia game as well. But as I said, kind of similar to Scalacci, it just seems to have been, he peaked for maybe 2 games in his career, which is... this was the time to do it, and that's the glory of the World Cup. I think it's notable in terms of the penalties as well that Scalacci doesn't take one. He claims he his muscles were a bit tight. He had slight niggle. I think he just bottles it. You
can see the press are so keen to link Maradona to this. I mean, the credit Maradona gets for Argentina's goal, despite what he effectively does, is just a pass out wide.
To the wing,
yeah, and they're like, of course, it has to be Maradona. You're like, he didn't even cross it. He didn't do anything. And it's the same with the penalties. He scores one of 4 penalties that go in, and ultimately it's Serena's penalty, which is it's not a great penalty at all, now it must be said. Goycochea does well to save both of them. Italy defeat themselves a bit. I think Vicini has to take a large part of the blame. They should be going... We know well that Argentina through this tournament have done the survival tactics and come up with a couple of special moments, the likes of Caniggia, as you mentioned. But Italy surely at home, in this kind of setting, should really have looked to take the game to them. And while they may have managed in some phases, the fact that he's reverted the type and tried to go safe and steady, they probably got what they deserved in the end, the Italians.
You have to kind of remember that Italy more or less defended their way through this tournament. They didn't score many goals. Scalacci bailed them out in 3 or 4 games, and the first goal they actually conceded was that Caniggia goal in the second half of the semi-final. So I think that probably sums up their mindset a little bit. During this tournament, they were very much kind of the archetypal Italian sort of Catenaccio side. They score a goal and then they get behind the ball, and it's worked for them up to this point. But I think against Argentina, against a team with Maradona playing his best game in the tournament, their luck ran out a little bit, even though they did get all the way to penalties.
If Diego going into this tournament was being voted like the ugliest man in the world and all by Italians, I can only imagine his popularity fell from there.
I don't think he was ever that worried about whether people liked him or not. I think his pre-tournament comments about, Napoli being discriminated against and all that stuff, I think that kind of, he was very much comfortable with the idea of being the pantomime villain, and I think he plays up to it to a point.
Can I just say, actually, I did love his quote just when you say that, because I mean, what he's actually using as an example there is probably quite fair. If you remember the signs that would have been sort of mocking Neapolitans dying of cholera and stuff like that, that the Juventus fans brought to the stadium or something like that. So he's
that's niche niggle right there.
Yeah, but I know, isn't it? But Maradona actually says Naples has always been forgotten by the rest of Italy, and then he corrects himself and he goes, in fact, it has always been given a slap in the face by the rest of Italy. I don't know why that is, but yeah,
he's always had a way with words.
I just wonder though, how could he have been hated anymore? They all look quite devastated after as well. Even watching can't say I was too delighted Argentina went through on this one. Turlock, do you remember people's opinions on Argentina at this point were already quite low, weren't they? As Dave kind of alluded to at the start, there's a lot of there's a lot of bah humbug in the newspaper.
Absolutely, particularly if you've been following the British press or even just listening to the commentary on the British TV stations. They've been full on bashing the Argentinians as kind of mindlessly negative thugs. This is something that goes back to 86, to the Falklands, to 66. There's a huge amount of kind of cultural stuff overlaid on top of this. But yeah, I mean, it's not a crime to not be as good as you were in 86 and still do well. I think there's actually, if you look up YouTube, there's a supercut of all Maradona's touches from this game. And you can see that he's still, if he's not the most impactful player in the world still, he's still technically the most brilliant. And I think the fact that he managed to kind of wring one last great performance, not probably as dominant as performances in 86, but at least show the flag, show his teammates that if we stay in this, I can still win this game. I can still put us through. I think actually that little pass he plays to Italia before the cross for Canigia's goal, it's really simple, but he does play it so that Italia has no choice but to cross it in. He was a kind of a genius for that kind of brilliant first touch, followed by a really, really clever second ball. Even if it's a very simple layoff. This is a slightly blasphemous comparison, but actually reminds me a lot of Glenn Crowe in the final stage of his career when he couldn't run beyond the defenders anymore, and he just played really simple balls in the last third of the pitch that opened things up. If you compare Maradona here to, say, Zidane in 2006, when he was kind of really strapped up and playing on basically one leg, Maradona here is playing with no functional legs and still manages to be not just Argentina's best player, but also their talisman. Just to refer back to Liam Brady, for a man who's so steeped in Italy, has a fairly jaundiced view of Italians, particularly in relation to penalties. I remember in the programme for his testimonial, he's talking about the time his penalty won Juventus the title on the last day after he knew he was being replaced by Platini. And he said, the crowd, being Italians, would have said I'd missed deliberately if I didn't score. And so it seems like I'm not sure if his prediction about Italy during the during the shootout was brilliant insight or just a little bit prejudiced, to be honest.
And didn't they kind of make him out to be some sort of hero because he didn't deliberately miss the penalty?
Yeah. Actually, Maradona's penalty in this, he runs away as though he either thinks the shootout is over or he doesn't care. Yeah, because he's scored.
It's a Ronaldo sort of thing, isn't it?
He'd heard what Liam Brady said. He's like, well, it's as good as over now that I've scored.
I should mention that Turlock referred to the Falklands there. We should point out for our Argentinian viewers, or indeed if Diego Maradona is listening, that it is disputed territory and it's known as the Malvinas in its original language. Fair
play. We're going to have to release a disclaimer after this. Well, look, Argentina have gotten where they needed to go. Bilardo, as I said earlier in these podcasts, Bilardo had talked about them needing to get to the final or the plane falling from the sky. So they've gotten there. No need for any planes to fall from any skies. That's probably the most inspiring Bilardo's been, because I was talking to you guys off air about his attempt at mind games beforehand, naming his team 48 hours early each time. I think he says he tried to confuse the Italians by just putting Desotti in. I don't think the Italians were too bothered either way. But either way, the Argentinians have made it. We might check in at home, Turlock, and just see how things are looking.
Yeah, the aftershocks are still very much being felt. 118 jurors are facing prosecution in Dublin alone for failing to turn up for jury duty during the World Cup. They're looking at least a £50 fine for that. Jack, meanwhile, has kind of gone to ground. He's back on a long-awaited fishing trip in the UK with a carbon fibre rod that Aer Lingus have given him.
Has he brought Bobby along? Because they were talking about fishing.
I think this is the trip, yeah. Bobby's still at the World Cup, yeah.
In Italy, he's talking about the cracking football.
Oh, yeah.
There's also some speculation about his future. He has kind of a gentleman's agreement to go up to the next World Cup, but his contract only takes him up to 92. So a lot of people want the FAI to firm that up. We know that firming up managers' contracts after a single good tournament is best practice from subsequent years. But in this case, I think it's the right decision. Meanwhile, Steve Staunton has had a huge homecoming of his own in Dundalk. Is Steve Staunton actually from Dundalk, or is he from Drogheda?
Yeah, Dave knows this well because
His brother played for Drogheda, I think.
If I'm not mistaken, Dave, didn't you tediously link him to the Dundalk job when Stephen Kenny left?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, but anyway, huge numbers of his fellow citizens have turned up just for a kind of a one-man homecoming. But unfortunately, his luggage has gone missing in the interim. Meanwhile, there's been a star-studded game in Rome, a UN famine relief game between Europe and the Americas, which finished Europe 10, Americas 7, with 4 goals each for Rossi and Zico. So yeah, no shortage of goals at that one.
And actually, doesn't Bobby's at that? Bobby's playing in that, I believe. So he's definitely not fishing with Jack.
That's the thing we forget. Like this was 24 years after 1966. We think that being so long ago, but it's actually closer to 1966 than it is to now.
Absolutely, yeah. That kind of fries my head a bit. That said, I was a kid in 1990, but 1966 seemed impossibly long ago then because black and white and all that kind of alienation you get from having such a distinct visual break with the past. But yeah, I reflect on that occasionally when I'm thinking about 1990, and it does freak me out.
That's the thing. Even during Italia 90, I always thought of Jack Charlton as being this old man, but really he was just a fairly young man at the time. He's still going strong at the moment.
That's the thing. Whereas now he is an old man.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say that, Dick.
He is. He's
85, isn't he?
I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. There was something wrong with when you said it years ago. Right.
I was a kid. I had an excuse.
We should note as well that Olivia de Havilland, when this game is played, has just turned 74. And as we're recording, she's just turned 104.
Wow. That is, can we describe her as an old woman? I think it's probably fair to do that at that point. Right, well, tomorrow we are going to bring you the next of the semi-finals. England are going to take on West Germany.
This is Giannini, still Giannini. Good save, and then in again, it's that man again. Schilacci has done it once more. Maradona played to the wide man, 3 in the middle. Caniggia on the near post, has scored! 1-1. And a place in the final of the World Cup of 1990 is going to be decided from the spot. Oh! Who would be in the shoes of Donadoni? That's Serena. Must score. Or Italy are out of their World Cup. And Italy are out. Argentina are in the final again. There is not to be a home victory.